Hello, welcome back. For our virtual attendees, we're going to go ahead and get started with our next session. I'm very excited to introduce Lisa Haralampus from NARA. She has a very important job in the policy office, and I've looked through her slides and I'm very excited about what she's presenting today. I am.
They're saying you're muted.
Oh, I am not muted. Can you just say something?
Hi, everybody. I'm Lisa Haralampus, and I'm doing a sound check.
Okay, wonderful. All right, you're up.
Thank you very much for that. So I'm Lisa Haralampus, and I'm doing more than a sound check. We're going to go ahead and start the presentation. Oh, so I guess the first part of my presentation is who I am, clearly. Lisa Haralampus. I'm the Director of Records Management, Policy, and Outreach. And I work at the National Archives Records Administration in our office of the Chief Records Officer for the U.S. government. That is what I am. So this is a little bit about our office for anybody in the room or online who is new to the work of records management, federal records management. Welcome. This is an exciting profession to have. Some people intentionally come to records management because they see a need. Some people fall into this.
I think we still have it muted here in the room.
I hope.
Oh, they were saying they couldn't hear.
It's, go ahead and do another.
I think I'm going to do one more double check. It must be good because Andrea says I'm amazing. I just started.
She can't hear you, but you're amazing.
Slightly closer.
Sure. I will try that. All right. Hopefully actually, we can hear virtually. Wonderful. All right, so as I was saying, I work in the office of the Chief Records Officer for the U.S. government, which means I cannot help you with any genealogy research because that's the National Archives part of the National Archives. They don't give me stack access, but I can help you if you want to talk about records administration. The second half of our name is I've been spending several years working in information management, records management, and I even say data management, but we don't call it that at the National Archives. So I'm going to just pause on this slide for a minute to provide a little more context. You're looking at a lovely picture of our headquarters building in College Park, Maryland, a building that I haven't seen in 3 years, except for twice. And I'm just so happy to be able to say that electronic records management and the systems that we put in place allowed us to keep working during COVID, during the pandemic. So we were producing policy. We were working on several projects. We had a remote staff in the first place that helped us make the transition really well. But it was interesting to sort of see the whole goals of everything we've been working towards. We're working towards digital government. And it was nice to see how that happened during the pandemic and how we improved. So our office does 4 things. We do training, we do oversight, we have an operations or a scheduling unit, and we have a policy unit. So I am the director of the policy and outreach. So that's why I'm going to focus my presentation today. Sort of, I loved when Dan was talking about requirements and NARA requirements and transfer to NARA. That's my office. We're the office that helps produce that policy and those requirements that you're working toward. And I wanted to share some of the commonality that we've had. This has been our mission and our vision and our numbers pretty consistently for the past 5 years. We're trying to draft records management policies to do what we've called, and sorry for the government ease, so it was integral to each agency's mission and managed electronically with minimal end user intervention. So what we've been trying to do is say, when people in agencies are working on their mission, they need to work on their mission. We would like them not to have to be also records managers. There should be systems, policies, processes set in place so that records management is done while you're doing your mission. And there is a group of information professionals behind the scenes that are working to do things like retention, policy, labeling, file plans, making those proactive decisions on how long we want to retain our information. Because that, to me, if you were to take away everything else on records management, knowing what you've got, documenting what you did, knowing what you're said, and then being very proactive on how long am I going to keep that. Because it's a record does not mean it's coming to the National Archives. It means we've identified that this is an information asset we have, and we're going to do something with that. So that's what we're trying to help agencies and DoD do. So I said that's what we've been doing for 5 years. There's been a lot more policy work that we've been doing since 2000 and really 2010, 2012, under the Obama administration, when they wrote the first Managing Government Records Directive. And for over decades now, NARA has been consciously and intentionally doing what we can to support the transition to digital government. So we have most recently in 2019 and 2023 issued 2 memos, which are simply titled The Transition to Electronic Records. We issued them in concert with OMB. So it's not just NARA saying this. We wanted to talk about how the federal government works. We're the chief records officer for the federal government. It's not just for NARA, it's for everyone coming to this conference. So we worked with OMB because they're the ones who have the weight and the authority to help us issue guidance government-wide. So the story goes, we started in 2013 saying we're going to transition to electronic records. And even then, that's part of why DoD 15.15.2 was endorsed at the time, because we're going to start moving to electronic records. And when you think of where we were in 2013 to where we are right now in 2023, it blows my mind. It was radical to say in 2013, let's stop printing email. Can we do that? Can we give ourselves 3 years to no longer print and file email? Let's try to get the tools in place to manage records electronically. And to think we're here now where we have said 10 years later, or 2022, December 30, with a slight extension for 1 more year, let's see if we can get to that goal of managing all records electronically. And that is the transition. And you have some lovely quotes on the screen that you've been able to read. You talk about why we think it's important. This is what the memo said, but I love, you don't see in here, well, we need to do records management because we have to manage our information. You're seeing in here, we want to be transparent. The word transparent in this context means the American public has a right to know what its government is doing. We should be transparent in sharing information from FOIA requests, e-discovery with historians in the future. We protect what we must, we release what we can, but you can't do any of that if you haven't preserved records and made these strong records management systems and policies in the first place. So it allows for transparency. And part of the reason we allow for transparency, and it's so important in the US federal government, is because that's how you get to accountability. You need to know, well, what did we do? What did we say? How can we get better? And I just love that at the end of the day, government works better when it's digital. Government works better when it's electronic. We will always have some interfaces with the public that are analog, right? There's always going to be somebody who has to file their taxes in paper, or they're going to request a service going in person to a government office. Yes, but that doesn't mean that has to stay in an analog format. Generally, we take information we get and we put it in our digital systems, our electronic systems, so that we can manage them and get them better answers faster. So the goals are, by June 30th, 2024, we would like all records to be managed electronically. And if agencies are operating agency record centers that are larger than 25,000 cubic feet, we would like that to get moved to commercial record centers, with the idea being from OMB that if things can be outsourced, they should be outsourced. Let the inherently governmental work stay within government. And generally running record centers is not inherently governmental. However, there's many reasons why it might be. And so in our NARA Bulletin 2020-01, we described an exception process. And there are many federal agencies and DoD components that have been asking for exceptions. And sometimes that has covered record centers because you're a global agency, may not want to use commercial record centers overseas. Also, depending on the nature of the material, for example, the FBI, this is not secret, the FBI is asking for extension for their facility in Winchester, and that just makes sense given what they do and how much investment they're spending in. So that's the transition, that's our goal. So how are we supporting? I said I wanted to come bring you some of the most recent work we've done. How is NARA supporting that transition? We've been a lot of different focus areas. And so I thought I'd come today and talk to you about what it is we're looking at. There's so many areas to improve to help do the digital transition. We can only do so much at a time. So the first area I want to talk about was e-messages. And thank you, Dan, for giving that example of what's there's a definition of a federal record. So I'm from policy, and it always seems good to start a presentation out with a reminder, right? If nobody else says it, what are we going to say? So for those of you from federal agencies that are here today, for the commercial or private vendors, this is just information. But for everybody else, what's a federal record? And you can see the definition up here. And what we like, the highlights I like to point out are made, I said created something, or received. You can be sent something, we can share information, and that it's related to business. So it's right, the transaction of public business. So if you're doing your job, usually you're creating records. There's kind of why you're hired for the government. So it's really kind of easy. Did you make it? Did you receive it? Is it related to anything that you are being paid to do for the US government? And then the last part is the one that says appropriate for preservation. That's the tricky part of the definition for a federal record. What does it mean appropriate for preservation? So we're going to get this into messages. I'll give the example. We're going to go to it. It is possible. And although I appreciate getting all of my federal news network, news feeds, GSN, government executive, I like to know what's going on in the federal government. Those are great examples. That is work I have received, and it is related to my business, just really for my information, right? You got to stay back to what's going on in the federal government. So you could say that was not appropriate for preservation. And it could be possible that you would have rules set up to say, I'm going to remove that type of information. One of the other examples we get is, well, surely all of my lunch appointments and calendars, like, that's not appropriate for preservation. And I would say, well, who are you? Who are you in your organization? Depending on who you are, your calendar and who you had lunch with might very well be a federal record appropriate for preservation. Me, I would say it is not appropriate. Even though I'm the director of policy, I'm happy to go to lunch with anybody anytime. And we are not, that will not be a long-term record we would keep. So we have this definition for federal records. It actually got updated in 2014 to actually say, recorded information is what's a record. And you can see with recorded information, that's why I was like, I try not to get too worked up over what's a record, what's information, what's data, and what's knowledge, because I feel we can spend a lot of time talking about that. But at the end of the day, did you document what you did? Do you know what you said? Can you prove you did your business? That's where I would like to focus on the function, not so much the individual piece. And hopefully if we do that, all the disciplines come together. Discovery, FOIA, privacy, knowledge management, data management, records management. We're all trying to do things to help manage information governance across agencies. So that's what I say, that's what the definition of a record is. It talks about recorded forms, and it doesn't matter if it's digital or electronic. It's interesting, our law started in 1950 was the original, and it said at 1950's definition was anything in machine readable form. And I was like, for years, I hated that definition, machine readable, that's so bad. And now looking back at where technology's become, like, I don't know, maybe that was a good definition. Does a machine read? Yeah, it's a record. But so that's where we came from today. And then I'm also showed up here and talked while you had a chance to look at it. What's the definition of electronic message? So the law was updated in 2014. In context, that was when we were working on email and email management policy. That was when Hillary Clinton had her email issue, and I'm just going to say, I'm no judgment, no comment. It's just that's what was happening. And so the Federal Records Act was amended to specifically say all electronic messages need to be managed under the rubric of records management. So what's also fun with this definition is, when looking at my slides here, that it is electronic messages is any recorded information used between individuals. And isn't that fascinating? So it's implied that it's people talking. So I don't know what that means for the Internet of Things. And I don't know what that means when we have systems talking to systems. But when we talk about electronic messages, it's individuals talking with other individuals. So that was a little background. And for the lawyers in the room and for the lawyers online, this is for you. This is the legal requirement of what we have to do with electronic messages. And what's interesting is you got to think, I said we were trying to do email 10 years ago. So shortly after that, it became not just email, but all electronic messages. So email is a subset under this. And you are required to capture, manage and preserve. You have to be able to find them over time, and you have to be able to do implementation of regulations. And for me, that means you take it through disposition, which is transfer or destruction. So I've said before, from our perspective at NARA, we sometimes talk about, do you have policies in place? Great, because that's the first step, knowing what you want to do. Do you have systems and solutions to implement those policies? You get credit for that. I know what I wanted. I wanted to preserve email of certain of our employees. I've been able to do it. Well, can you sort it? Can you figure out how to manage it? And then are you able to access it over time? So it's policies, systems, access over time. I tried not to say accessibility because that's a different word in a different profession. It's very important that information be accessible for all people, regardless of their abilities. But access just means, can I open, find, and retrieve it? That's a problem sometimes. And then once you've done that, you've managed it disposition, which often means sending it to NARA. So we've been very active in this space recently. And starting in 2002, we issued a bulletin to talk about the resubmission of capstone forms. I'm going to take one pause. I'm looking to see if there's a clock anywhere in the room that I can read.
33.
Thank you very much. But oh my gosh, would you look? What a helpful person in the room. Just put a thank you so much for that. Thank you. I really thank you.
You're welcome.
Right, because I can talk about records management all day. So if I don't keep track of my time, I'll get to the end and we won't have had time to questions. And I would really like to take questions if I can. So we're here, I was talking about the different pieces of guidance. We talked about the resubmission of capstone. And thank you for mentioning capstone. I am now at the point where I come to conferences, and even if you're new, I'm going to assume you've heard about capstone. That is an approach to managing email. It can also be expanded as an approach to managing other types of records, and the approach says, look at the basically who remember I tried to lead into that. Well, whose lunch calendar is it? Is it mine? I'm not a capstone official. All my records, all my emails, 7 years and we're done. There are certain officials that are designated as capstone, meaning these are the people in your organization who have a role where it's really, really likely they're going to be creating permanent records. And if we're keeping the executive correspondence and the speeches and the briefings and all these other records related to that person, we would also like to take their body of communication. And it's a collection. We don't normally say collection at NARA. You'll hear us talking about series and files and items. But higher than the series level, there's often a record group or even a collection like principle. So I was just saying, if you've been talking, that's a communication collection, and we at NARA would like to have that. So we did this bulletin to say we would like you to resubmit capstone forms, and complementary, we issued another bulletin in 23 that expanded capstone for electronic messages. So behind the scenes, we've been calling it chatstone. So I'm like, okay, that helps you. It was capstone for email. Now it's capstone for all types of electronic messages. And part of those requirements were, the capstone approach said, pick your people, identify these roles, and that's the email that we're going to try to preserve, or the messages we're going to try to preserve. To make sure that those lists stay accurate, we're going to ask every 4 years that they could resubmit that form, because things change, people reorganize. You may hire in the middle of the administration undersecretaries or principal, new people to help that might reach that level. So the first 2 bulletins said, please resubmit every 4 years, and please you may consider expanding capstone to chatstone to capture messages. We have also issued a new general record schedule that complements e-messages. We also made sure to have e-messages in our regulations. And heads up, if I'm lucky in the next year, I'm going to get, a year from now, you'll see regulations that are even more specific, just about handling electronic messages. We've also developed a web page to make sure we're update with our guidance, and we've had some webinars and some information about capstone board and messaging. So that is our goal. We would like to start thinking, when you transition to digital government, be looking at, well, how else are we functioning? What are the new tools we're using? Are we using WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram? Are we using e-messages, mobile apps? We're trying at National Archives to look at ways that we can help automate retention of that information and automate deletion. Like I said, if I want to put up a rule and the systems allow me to do it, to delete news articles that come my way, Capstone can handle that as well. So that is one focus area for us. The second focus area is digitization. So for a Microsoft conference, I was like, should I talk about digitization? Because that's kind of it's not a born digital process, but I have to, because it's been my life for 3 years, a significant part of my life for the past 3 years. So I'm just going to share that digitization is another focus area for NARA and how that works with the transition to electronic records. I'm a policy director, so I'm always starting with my policy. I think it's important to share that for the past 10 years with the Federal Records Act amendments, they told us, NARA, you need to issue regulations. Those regulations need to contain standards that will allow agencies to transition to electronic records by digitizing their records and disposing of the originals. Dispose is a very fun word in records management because it means you have hit the end of the retention period and you're going to do something. 99.9% of the time, that something is deletion. But every once in a while, we used to say 3 to 5% of federal records come to NARA. Let's move some decimal points on that because of the explosion of information is so great. What NARA takes is very, very small. But disposition covers those instances when you are going to transfer records to the National Archives. I like to say when records get to go to records heaven and stay with us, because we don't delete records when they come to NARA. We are preserving them and making them available and saying, yep, this was important enough to become part of our history. And that's our mission. So disposition means destroy, but it doesn't sound as harsh as destroy. So we get to disposition. So the goal there is to destroy the originals, to not invest in resources to maintain those records, and instead invest our resources in managing the digital versions. So that was our guidance. I'm also going to add, when we wrote these regs, it was the idea that you have paper in boxes. Let's make those images in systems. When you do the digitization, you may find that you take that digitized image and you use it and reuse it because now it's an asset that you have that you can do more. But our standards were to say, the image that you've got is going to be so good that it's going to come to the National Archives and we're going to be able to preserve it. And what's a good record? It's a series where we know what was said, we know what was in there, we know if there were gaps. Like I say, there might be a lot of gaps in record series coming around 2020 when people will say, yep, we're doing this work. We always got a wet signature. It took us 6 months to figure out how to not deal with the wet signature. So we don't have this series for those 6 months. That's the kind of thing we'll need to know at the National Archives in the future. So it's like, are there gaps? What are you digitizing? And when we know that, then we can say we're going to take this record because it's a beautiful, good image. It was good means it's complete, reliable, trustworthy, and accurate. Also, that you can read it over time, that you can retrieve it over time, and that it's going to serve as a classic federal record. What I'm also trying to say is the idea is it's the image that we're taking to be part of NARA. And if you want to do more to that image, you can, but it's that first image that National Archives is expecting to have under the current record schedule. So I started to get to this part as well. A lot of people, and this has been, when you talked about NARA's previous guidance, would say 300 DPI. Got it. We are compliant with NARA. Oh, good. You got my records management joke. I laugh in the back of the room is always appreciated. When I show this slide, I want to show how important digitization is, that it is not just the technical standard. You'll find those technical standards. You'll find them right there in 1236.50, which has the digitization requirements. But look at how much I want you to do before you even start worrying about the technical parts. Yeah, you're going to have scope and definitions because we got to explain what we're talking about. We have records management requirements, documentation requirements, quality management requirements, your formats, because NARA can't save every format. We can only save a certain number. So we have file format requirements. When you do all that, now you can start digitizing records and being prepared, because these are the digitizing standards for permanent records. So you know going in, a box that I'm digitizing it so it become part of our nation's history. And we at NARA will be better able to serve that to the public in the future, because we won't have to go find the box. We will be able to say we have already accessioned it and uploaded it to our servers and described it. It's in our catalog. You can find it, provided there's no access restrictions, which you identified in your metadata requirements. So we have metadata requirements, digitization, and we have this one term on here, mixed media. Think of that as what's in the box. Again, like I love laughs from the crowd. Anybody who's done digitization work knows you're going to open that box and you're going to find a thumb drive, maybe a DVD, and God help you if you find a floppy, right? Because these are permanent records. They might have been in a box for 20 years. You don't know that's 20 years. Back in 2013, 2020, 23, or 1993. You just don't know what's going to be there. So you have to find out what's in the box and determine if we have the complete series. So that's what mixed media is about. It's just making sure you know what's in the box and getting ready to sign it. So that is what we're doing with digitization. And the way that could relate to this Microsoft Summit is I hope you have really good, beautiful, clean images that can be uploaded into, preserved within Microsoft, and potentially be now using Microsoft's records management to manage the born digital and the digitized. So it's all in one collection, in one series, and there will be certain metadata you'll need for the digitized images that will come through digitization. My slides in general, I like to leave, I know the number one question asked, can I get a copy of the slides? Of course you can get a copy of the slides. So I like to show resources. The goal here is if you're online or you are in the room with your computer, you wanted to look up this information to find out more. This is a screenshot of our webpage. We recently created to be a resource for agencies who are faced with digitization questions. And you're seeing 6 blocks now. When we get the GRS out to cover that, they're going to add the GRS. We're going to add more FAQs. We're going to be adding more guidance products. So over time, this will become more robust. This is what we have now. I'm going to try not to talk about it too much, because we have a lot to cover today. And it's Microsoft, not digitization. So one more resource for folks online or who are going to look at the slides. Where do you find the regulations? They were issued on May 4th. It is June 13th. Good news is last week they just got published in the Code of Federal Regulations. So you can actually find them in the CFR. That's the link to the webpage I just showed you. And I am plugging our Records Express blog. There's a couple of different ways you can get in contact with NARA on our Records Express blog. We not always the most active blog. We don't try to produce like a blog a week. We just use it when we got something to say. And we got a lot to say over the past 5 weeks about digitization. So we just put together a series of blog posts where you can go learn more. And if none of those resources help you and you want to learn more about digitization so that you can get great digitized records to accompany born digital records, that is the team's email. So one of the teams that work for me is a policy and standards, and they are very busy right now as we continue to develop products and answer questions and keep moving on digitization. The third area I wanted to focus on, which brings us back a little bit more towards Microsoft and electronic records management tools, is FERMI. And let me see if I spelled it out on the next slide. I did. FERMI stands for the Federal Electronic Records Modernization Initiative. And that is a name that we were told to give ourselves 5 years ago when they said, you have a great idea in this policy shop. Your idea has gotten to the point where you need an acronym. So we now have a thing that we call ourselves, And that is the Federal Electronic Records Modernization Initiative, which is enough to tell you what we're trying to do and vague enough to allow us to do whatever we need. Fermi, the goal of Fermi was we are very good, NARA, at writing requirements. We're very good at these requirements that have to be explained across the federal government. Like I just did with e-messages, right? I didn't give any nod to you might be a small commission that is using electronic messages to communicate among 50 people, or you might be DOD, right? And then of all the components, and I'm like, right, it's preserve electronic messages, please. So we know that we were doing a lot with policy, but not very much with how to implement that policy. And so we are trying within Fermi, and that's a lovely photo of Enrico Fermi, because why not? Also, you know, when you do an acronym, you got to search, make sure your acronyms.
Yeah.
gotta be okay.
Yes.
So we did our searches and we're like, hey, Enrico Fermi, he's you know, an astrophysicist, a rocket science. And we were like, yeah, records management has become rocket. We used to always, it's not rocket science, it's not brain surgery. I'm like, it's complicated. It takes a lot of work. Yeah. We want, Enrico Fermi is our patron saint because we want to do good through the technology and the tools that we need to put in place to handle the complexity of electronic records management. So it's we are working with GSA. In a nutshell, we're working with GSA. We work with GSA to say we can provide the requirements, but I can't help agencies who are trying to do implementation. It's not NARA's lane to recommend vendors or get involved in that space. That's GSA's lane. So GSA has been partnering with us, and they have worked on vendor lists of vendors who self-certify they can meet our requirements. So what are our requirements? I said GSA is the person helping. They're not here today, so I'll just say records management at GSA is how you can get in touch with that group. And I'll have a few more links, I think. But the requirements are the key. And we issued them in 2017. And then we updated them in 2020. And here we are 3 years later, we are updating these requirements again because laws change, tools change. I'll give you my, for instance, I love that you mentioned Chat GPT earlier because I'm taken with it. I am fascinated to think about what the interfaces to OpenAI could do for us, like us Americans, us people, us federal employees. So I'm going to have to watch that space and see if there's any new requirements or, you know, things to write policy wise. I can already tell you right now, the records management principles still apply. Did you do something? Did you document it? Is it a record? I don't really care if you created it with Chat GPT or you created it yourself. It could even be created Chat GPT and wrong. If you did something, that's still a document of what we did, very appropriate for preservation. So from that perspective, Chat GPT would be the same as records management. But what could be new is, how did we train that? Are we using like the wide open to the public version? Or are we going to start using Chat GPT and training it on agency information? It sort of goes to defensible disposition policy. Well, if you're going to have a defensible disposition policy, you need that records management piece. So I will tell you, that's not on the slides, I'm just sharing. That's what I'm thinking about now in that space. So that could be a reason we may in the future need to update our universal ERM requirements with some sort of new category. But right now we're updating it to talk about the digitization requirements. We are updating it to remove, I believe, some of the transfer requirements because we have it elsewhere. This is where you go to find the universal ERM requirements. And that is part of the basis that when Microsoft talks about compliance and how can we comply, this is the tool that talks about what those requirements are. So we'll say things like, you need to have a records disposition schedule with a retention period that your system can implement. And you need to have a requirement that says you can put a litigation hold and not delete those records that you need for a lawsuit. Where did that come from? It comes from these requirements here. And I noticed there was a discussion about 5015.2 in the chat earlier. From NARA's perspective, we revoked our endorsement of 5015.2. That doesn't mean that it can't still exist and be, used on its way out, but we revoked our endorsement because we're currently endorsing our own products that we've written. So that's what, in my mind, the universal ERM requirements are the set of high-level minimum requirements that apply to all types of records And it's where you go to find what should I do to capture. Oh, look, it's on the slide. Capture, maintain, dispose, transfer, manage. And what do I need as a records manager so that I can know what's in the information? That reporting, number 6, that's the requirements for us. Because you got to have systems that tell us the information we need so that we keep that in there as well. And so be on the lookout this summer. We have gone through lots of comments and we will be updating and sharing them as well. When we update the requirements, GSA works with its vendors so that they have opportunities to say, yes, we can comply with NARA's requirements. Or we can comply with certain parts of NARA requirements. You don't have to do the whole thing. You might just be like, actually, I'm a digitization vendor, so I can comply with these new digitization requirements. Or you might say, no, I'm really good at, I'm preserve it. I just preserve my space is social media. So I download, maintain, capture, and create that. So GSA is the vendors that'll be working with these requirements. I love it. So Fermi for us was first, can we help people with tools and solutions and services? That's what Fermi does when we work at GSA. But we're also working with GSA and the Business Services Council to integrate our requirements with other federal business lines. Lines of business is what they used to be called. Terminology changes, so I'm sorry if I still remember from things from the 2000s. But the idea for this is we have developed the FBIF wheel. And if you want to learn more about, you have the requirements, they were the high level. Then we did basis capabilities, business use cases, talked about our standard elements. Service measures are the last one we're working on. The idea behind the FBIF is, wouldn't it be nice if NARA could give the GRS, the General Record Schedules, on how to manage personnel records to OPM, who is developing the HR systems that all agencies use. Now you got your retention baked in because they understood what the retention policies were, because every agency is responsible for their own personnel records using the shared services. So that is our goal with this. And I was laughing. Why did I use that example? So, well, this is a federal agency webinar or summit, federal agency summit for DoD. And personnel records are very important for all of us in this room. So hopefully the work we're doing through Fermi, through the FIBF, will help other shared services as they provide their solutions to help the government keep going, keep working, keep administering, will be baked in. The last area, it's like, okay, Microsoft Summit. Lisa, come up and say something about Microsoft. I appreciate that Megan talked about perhaps having a monthly group to talk about this. We too have a monthly group to talk about records management. And I think the more we get together and discuss things, the better. So we started, gosh, I'm trying to remember how this began. I would say we started with, like in 13 and 14, community of interest. We should have a community of interest, a COI. And we called it our electronic automation because the focus there was automation. And then starting about, I would say 3 years ago, we pivoted and said, no, we don't need to do about office automation. We really need to talk about how can we help federal agencies implement records management with Microsoft. We've talked about the policies that we've put in place. I said we wanted to do more how to implement this policy, but that's not NARA's role. So we worked with GSA, but we still weren't doing enough. So we've tried to foster a user group. Agencies can talk to each other and share and do lessons learned. We meet once a month. It is open for people who have .gov emails or .mil emails. So in other words, it's not open to the public, but yes, if you've hired contractors to do records management, they're very welcome to come talk about records management. And as you can, I pulled this screenshot off of max.gov, so you could get a sense of what we have available. And yes, max.gov is going away and we're going to have to transition onto the next tool. We're not quite sure what that will be. It's not December yet, but we have monthly meetings. And if you go to our Max site, you can sort of learn who's come to share, who's come to talk, what resources we've shared. So that is our Microsoft group. We've also worked with Microsoft Matt, I don't even know what to call us. We have an alignment meeting, so we've had an opportunity to talk with Microsoft to share our requirements, things like the general record schedules, so that Microsoft 365 for federal clients would understand, can we start figuring out how those labels would be applied? So we have some alignment meetings. We have this work user meeting, and we are doing our best to try to help agencies manage their records wherever they are with whatever tools they need, so they have the policies, systems, access, and disposition in place. So that is a resource I would invite you to join. My last slide here is connect with us. If you're very interested about federal records management, I have only brushed on covered a few hot topics and sort of gave some explanation of our viewpoint and who we are. These are different ways you can connect. I mentioned the blog. We also, I love it, AC memos. AC is just our org term. Sorry for having an acronym. But if you would like to receive emails that we send out, again, whenever we have something to say. So sometimes we'll send out 2 in a week, and then you might not hear from us for a few months. But we try to share information about things we've worked, products we've developed through emails, Records Express, Bridge, which I'm sorry to say you cannot attend today because you're in this summit. And I have to go this afternoon to go doc and do my executive producer role for Bridge this afternoon. But they're always we send them out on YouTube. They're available on YouTube immediately. So if you want more records management after everything you've done today, go look at our Bridge meeting this afternoon. And we're on social media with our training program, and you can email us as well. And I did not do the next slide, which is questions. So I'll just go back to this and say, I think I've left enough time to take questions. So go ahead. Hi. Back of the room first. I'll keep an eye on chat as well.
Hi, Lisa. For those who don't know me, my name is Michael Org. I'm actually with Microsoft, and I'll be speaking later today. But I do have a question for you, Lisa. It's good to see you again.
Oh, yeah, nice to see you too.
We're starting to get a lot more questions around the offset requirements to encrypt data and provide data security, and who owns that decryption process versus agency or department's requirement to preserve that data. What are you all seeing from your side? Do you have any, are you working on it? Do you have any thoughts?
I do want to work on this. I do feel it's an issue. So the issue is, from NARA's perspective, yes, we have to have trustworthy, authentic, and reliable information, which means that information needs to be protected when it's in rest and protected when it's in transit. But I said you have to be able to access that information over time. So over time to an archivist means decades, not weeks. And encryption is proving an issue in both e-discovery and records management. It's like you transfer to NARA boxes that are locked and we can't get in. We can't get in, we can't do processing, we can't make it available. So we say, sorry, this transfer hasn't happened. So that is the philosophical problem with encryption. We want to preserve it, but over time it gets hard because we don't have the keys to unlock things that are PKI protected. Encryption on attachments, so we get the emails, but we can't get into the associated records. So it's a problem for access over time. Our policy will be, we can't take encrypted information. So in practice, we are very comfortable with agencies being able to encrypt and protect that information over time, but you've got to be able to remove that encryption when it comes time to transfer it to NARA. Generally speaking, it's 25 years. Earliest 15, but most likely 25 or 30 years old. So the good news is we may have to break encryption that's 25 years old. Hopefully, if you think back, I'm like, oh, those encryption codes are not as robust as they would be today, but we're very concerned about encryption going forward. So I have no solutions. Just we're aware of it. The answer to the question is we're aware of it, and we're trying to think about policies to put in place. We're not encryption experts, so we're probably not the right people to talk about it, but we can have that requirement. You have to know what you did, and you have to be access your records over time. So I'm open. I'd be very happy to have more conversations about that, either through the Microsoft group, because I know there's Microsoft email encryption. There's encryption that Microsoft can do. How can that be removed when time comes? It's kind of scary because if you can remove encryption, then anybody can remove encryption. And then you have to balance both times, but
Lisa, we have some questions in the chat.
Oh, sure.
From Mr. Lawrence, I believe. Lawrence D. What about AI and the culling processes of terabytes of electronic data? Does NARA have recommendations?
NARA allows for culling, and we have not said how, who, or why. We've had many agencies talk to us about culling through retention policies or rules that are set in place, like I can train systems on these rules, and then we can do the culling. So we've heard about examples, and that's totally, I'm sorry, I'm talking to you as though you answered the
That's
question.
okay.
So, hey, Devin, culling through AI would be permissible with records management policies. Deletion and has to be defensible. So it's important to think about how you're going to document, how you trained your system to do AI. And that is the only way that it'll come. And I can tell you, my colleagues work in accessioning who take in records would prefer that agencies at least do the first pass of culling non-record and personal information from those records before we take them at the National Archives. And I, as the policy director, would really like to see that culling be automated and behind the scenes and not done by individuals real time as they're creating records. Because yes, nobody can identify what's a record real time the day they sent it. Because you don't know what's going to happen a month from now where you're going to want to say, oh, that thing that I deleted was important to what's happened in the future. So records management is done best over time. It really, that's my it's what I think where I sit now. So AI deletion is permissible. Make sure that it's defensible, documented so it's defensible, and it should be done. Should be possible.
Let's do one more question, and then for the sake of time, we'll go to our next presenter. Any update on capabilities?
Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
2 questions.
Oh,
Go ahead.
yes.
I'll answer fast.
Any update on capabilities to transfer data electronically from the M365 clouds to NARA directly with larger transmission sizes?
No updates to share at this time, but we are working on it. So stay tuned. As soon as we have information, we'll share it.
All right. And then was there your second question? Yes.
Trish Spencer, support to DoD records officer. As you think about the transition with Capstone to Chatstone, I'm now adopting, our emails were kind of like letters, all encompassed with the metadata
Yeah.
and so forth. Now, as we look at other types of electronic messages, they're much more dependent on each other.
Mhm.
And that's a little bit challenging, I think,
Yeah,
records management. Do you have any thoughts on that?
yeah, I think we need to talk about threading as a requirement. So we're looking at, can we write like another requirement to support that talks about threading? Because without the threading, you lose it. You lose the context and the conversation. But how do we do that? I'm not quite, like, it's kind of, I don't know, if anybody has examples of requirements they've seen on threading, that would be useful. And I would say that's also why I tried to say earlier, thinking of it as a collection. I need to create this collection. So this collection could be the text, SMS messages. It could be the Teams chats that were direct, and then the links to the material. If you don't have the links, then you don't have a full record either. So we're trying to think of threading is an area we need to look at, and metadata is the other area. So we can actually say for a text, you need this, for this, because email, the email for standard is nothing but one giant piece of metadata, right? To, from, BCC, timestamp, received, opened. That's what an email is. But I'm not sure I could do that as quickly for all of the other types of like WhatsApp. I don't know what the file format is, WhatsApp yet.
And we can talk about how Microsoft has technologically put some of that in place, and I'll cover some of that during my session. However, that doesn't define policy, right? That's more what is art of the possible, what you can do. We've gotten a lot of push. The drivers behind this have primarily been organizations like FINRA and financial services, because they've always had mandatory requirements that are hyper aggressive. So I think we can tell you what we're doing there, and you can kind of reflect back as a community and determine, is that what's right for US government?
Yes, and that is why I'm glad to be here to talk about policy, because I know implementation is very tricky. I do have lots of good speakers that'll be sharing that this afternoon. So Megan, I'll stop and turn over to my next favorite speaker.
Thank you very much. That was awesome. The folks in the chat that said you're awesome. That's correct.
Thank you so much. All right.
Really quickly, I'm going to stop the recording and restart it so that later, if you want to rewatch sessions, you don't have to figure that out. So let's